Hello, and well, I'm not sure it's good morning, it's good lunchtime. Welcome to our little chat here, Cultivating Confidence with me, Gill Gayk, and the lovely Kirsty van der Bulk. And the topic we've chosen today is boundaries and boundaries for success. I think it's boundaries is a really, really broad topic, but we thought it would be a really interesting conversation that we could have today around setting boundaries and why and the benefits of it. And it's particularly pertinent for this week, which is Mental Health Week, because it's so easy, no matter whether you're employed, whether you run your own business, in whatever situation in our lives, that we are a little bit too elastic with our boundaries, and we wait for other people to make decisions for us. And actually, that disempowers us. It disenfranchises, it takes away our agency. And actually, when you set clear boundaries for yourself, it helps you to be more focused and to have more control. And I think that's so important in certainly in the modern day, where we're being bombarded with information all the time. It's kind of being very clear about what it is you do and how you do it. So there's a couple of elements to that. So it's not just about the minuscule, what time, how long you set meetings for, and how long they do that. But it's being clear about what services you offer as well. What are your thoughts on that, Kirsty?
So I don't think, I think everyone has to have boundaries. I know I've got lots, particularly when it comes to presenting or going live like we are right now. Mm-hmm. If you haven't defined your boundaries and you know what you will not discuss, you can get really, really tripped up. You can go down a rabbit hole. You can be tripped up by your own emotions, whereas boundaries will allow you to have that limit. And it's not about that you don't break them, because we do break them, but it's about having the choice of when you break them and why you're breaking them. So it's about empowering yourself much more than actually limiting yourself, because you empower yourself by putting a boundary in place. You define where you want to go, what you want to. Loads of people who've been on the podcast will know what my boundaries are. I will talk about some of my family life, but I won't talk about all of it. I will talk about the toxicity of my first marriage, but I won't go into the ins and outs of it. One, because I don't think social media is a place, so boundaries on socials. So I think boundaries are really, really important, and without them, I actually, it's a bit like watching a fish out of water. I flap around with no direction.
And I think that is exactly where we need to think about it. Is actually it's a framework. It helps you be settled and grounded, because you know what it is that you where you will go and how far, and it helps you take control of a situation.
And it's that control thing, isn't it? It's like the minute you are out of control is the minute we start to spiral, the minute we start to lose focus. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? Because mine is very much like, I have my boundaries.
I know that I stumble quite a lot. I'm very good at telling other people how to keep their boundaries. That's my coachy thing doing. But I'm very aware that I don't. And one of those things is one of my key drivers is helping people. And so very often I go a little bit too far at the expense of my own well-being, or just general health. Not just over committing is another one we're all very good at. Promising things for people who don't necessarily appreciate it, and that's not their fault, it's my fault. So what I would do is, it's a little bit about making sure very clear about what services you offer, and sticking to them, and go, okay, I offer one-on-one coaching, and I offer team coaching, but there are certain things that I'm not good at, and I know that I'm not good at, and if I try and deliver it, I know I'm not doing a good job, and you damage your brand, and you damage your relationship with your client, and you don't feel good about yourself. So actually, knowing what you can't do is as good as knowing what you can do.
And there's that thing, isn't it? It's like, as parents, so we're both parents. As parents, one of the things we do, and boundaries are so important, because we're given them from a really young age, and then suddenly we turn. Now, I went off the rails. I was absolutely wild in my 20s and 30s. And if I think back to that person, my boundaries were limitless. But I don't allow my own child to have limitless boundaries. And it was that limitless boundaries meant that I pushed and pushed and pushed, but I got into a lot of trouble. I mean, thankfully I was never arrested. I was never in major trouble, but I did get myself into situations that I could have possibly avoided if I'd had an element of control. So in my childhood, I probably had too many boundaries, probably because of what we went through as a family. But now I try to balance that as a parent. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly from a parenting point of view, and possibly with your clients as well, people will always test your boundaries. So this is a top tip. I shouldn't really tell you this because now my kids know. My personal boundaries were here. What I told my kids was that was there. So there was that if they pushed the boundary, it wasn't to my danger zone. It was to the mummy's going to frown at you kind of zone. So obviously you have to, part of the discipline is setting those boundaries, but the reason we do it is because as adults, we need boundaries, as you clearly said. So what we do is we teach our children the limitations, and then you have conversations about it, and it's age appropriate conversations, isn't it? Is you will tell them why you've set the boundary and talk about the consequences.
But I think also boundaries give you resilience. I think it's
Yeah,
a really interesting thing. So one of the things I say to our daughter quite a lot is, "Mummy's," and we call it, what is it? It's not going to come to me. But anyway, I talk about my boundary and how I'm really, really good. And then the window of tolerance. So that's it,
yeah.
the window of tolerance.
That's a nice word. That's big.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I talked to her, and I've got a lip thing on lip gloss, sorry. One of the things that I said to her, she was pushing and pushing and pushing, and I was exhausted. As many a parent, I'm just going to touch on this parenting thing, and I'm going to give you a little tip that I use for my daughter. I was trying to explain this window of tolerance, and I drew a box of a window and explained that eventually there's only so much that you can keep in this space, and it wasn't working. We've all know about this carrot, and you put it in the door and you slam it and you hurt your fingers. So I took it a step further and I blew up a balloon. And this balloon was brilliant because, of course, with a balloon, I kept saying to her, push it, push it, push it. Just keep pushing it. That's mummy's temper. That's mummy's struggles. That's how mummy's dealing with work. That's how mummy's dealing with clients. That's how mummy's dealing with life. All these things that mummy has to do. Now push it so hard, really, really as hard as you can. And of course, the balloon popped. And I went, and that is when mummy's boundaries have been broken.
I think, I mean, yeah, we can have a whole podcast about parenting, but a lot of my thought is that it's very important that you recognize your own emotions and you deal with them. So actually, in the moment, sometimes we're short-tempered and we snap, and I think it's really important that we actually apologize and say sorry about that. I've had a difficult day, and I don't know whether it doesn't matter whether that's with a child or a client, teenager. It's what you're doing is you're actually making it possible for them to apologize to you when they overstep too. And I had a very interesting conversation with a client this morning, and I think that I can imagine quite a lot of our listeners or viewers will have the same. And we were talking about having a chance to get together. And we were talking about a workshop and all that kind of stuff, doing something together. And she said, I don't know, my diary's a little bit difficult at the moment. I'm waiting for a client to get back to me. I'm supposed to be doing 1.5 days a week, and they haven't decided which days. And I went, whoa! You are giving them control of your boundaries. Why was it that you left corporate life? And she said exactly the same, so that I had more control of my client base, my diary, my time. And I said, but all you're doing is you're literally giving that option, that decision making to your client. What you need to take back control and say, we said we're going to do 2 days a week over the next 6 weeks. These are the days I'm available. And so that you actually set time aside for yourself, for your business, and to do things that are important to you. And I think that is where boundaries become really valuable, because if she left it up to her client, then she's holding her whole diary open for that one client. It means that there's no one else that can fill that space. She can't even commit to having a lunch, a coffee with someone, a meetup, a potential new client, because you're holding that. You're literally waiting. So it's kind of like, I'm not available on Friday. Yeah. Or, you know, and again, it's also setting the boundaries, being very clear to yourself. And it's not always easy to have that conversation with yourself, because we want to be available for our clients, but actually understand what your non-negotiables are.
And it's really important that we've just gone through this. We were just talking about it in the studio before we went live. I've had to readjust because something changed. Our daughter changed school. My routine for work has now changed. And so I've had to set new defined boundaries. You know, looking at this, we've launched this podcast. I've got the Wise Why. It's cut down to bi-weekly. I'm looking at my workload. I'm not time blocking. I'm not a time blocker because I need some flexibility.
Yeah.
But there is a definite element of control. And I have time for my clients, time for me. And if I don't schedule and set a boundary for me to deliver my own work, then it becomes a stress. And that stress becomes real. And that stress starts building and building and building and building. Then I don't sleep. Then we get that knock on. Then I get stressed.
Exactly.
Then and you can see how it spirals into being somebody who's in control to being somebody who's out of control. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but I certainly know.
And it's exactly that. When we are stressed, we are, or when we're out of control and we're stressed, our bodies are coursed with cortisol, and that actually initiates the fight or flight response, which actually shuts down some of our brain capacity. It shuts down our creativity, and it gets us into this fight or flight mode. So all of your arms and legs are working, but what's going on up here isn't, and you can't control. There's all sorts of physical responses to those. So actually taking back control means that you de-stress your life. Everybody has an element of planning. For some people, time blocking works, and for other people it's kind of just having a rough idea of what you're going to do on the day, and some of it is dependent on mood and energy levels, and I think that's a really good way of playing with it. But actually knowing what you want and how you're going to do it is really important, and not compromising. Being, again, it's setting a boundary and being aware of where the compromise is.
But that comes back to goal setting. Okay.
Yeah, funny that.
Of course it does. Of course, but also obviously public speaking. But it really comes back to setting those goals by defining where you want to be. I'm not this. I'm talking about goals here. I was talking about goals this morning with one of my clients, and it's that setting the goals to drive you to where you want to be, to reach everything, so that you are. You are functioning at your best level. I mean, this is your
absolutely.
It's not mine.
No, and it's back to the same thing. It's so that you don't get distracted by other things. But it's that whole. If we think of it from a mental health point of view, it's funny how setting those boundaries and setting time in your diary for specific things helps. Because, well, I would talk about it a lot. Its balance is really important. That you don't focus too much on one thing because something else falls down, and so that actually treating yourself as your own client is really important, and blocking time. And there are plenty of people do it, and there are, well, all of the successful people do it. There's plenty of people that block time for an afternoon nap, for a power nap.
I need one of
there
those.
are people. Yeah, there are very successful business people that will have an afternoon in the week where they go off. They go and do whatever. They just go off on their own, and they will do whatever takes their fancy, whether it's, playing a round of golf, or going and trying something different, going wine tasting, I don't know, whatever it is that takes your fancy. Sometimes it's taking a step away from your business and the stresses of every day, just to reset. Give your brain a little bit of a break.
And talking about that for a second, there's a real thing about oversharing, which I want to talk about, because if you haven't set boundaries, then you're likely to overshare. Mm-hmm. You're likely, and you see it all the time on social channels. How much should you share and how much shouldn't you share? But that time element, I've really clearly defined that my family has got special time. Now, because of the new work thing, it means I have to work a little bit on a Saturday morning. But I take Friday afternoon off now. And Friday afternoon, I go watch my daughter play a match. And I now no longer work Friday afternoons, everybody. And this is new. It's exciting. But it's also time for me to be with my daughter. And that, I think, is a really important boundary for me. But going back to the oversharing, because I think it's really important we talk about that. When we forget about our boundaries or we push the boundaries, we lose an element and we're back to that control. I don't know if you want to expand a bit more on that aspect, because
but we did touch on it just now. There's a bit of a PR element in there, isn't it? It's just, if you don't set that boundaries, you could be in an interview situation and people, you mention something and then they start asking you questions which you are wholly uncomfortable with. And I certainly know there's quite a few people in my network that they never show photographs of their children on social media, because they say they don't, when they're 18, when they reach 18 and their whole lives are mapped out on social media, how are they going to feel? And it's that kind of thing. And it's if you haven't set that boundaries, if you share too much, then you are not in control of the consequences of that. And I think that's really important.
We see that a lot. We saw it with that awful, and I know people go on and I say, don't be a Karen. Well, actually, I wish people would stop doing that, because that's not very nice, because that's just somebody who hasn't gone through on-camera coaching and learned that if you hear a question that you don't know the answer to, you have every right to turn around in a live situation and go, do you know what? That's a little bit too personal, or I didn't quite hear the question. Can you repeat it? And yet, when in a live situation, I mean, we're live right now, but in a live situation, people aren't trained to be able to turn around and say confidently, hence why we've brought boundaries into confidently, cultivating confidence, actually have the confidence to turn around and go, I didn't hear that. Can you please repeat it? I'm uncomfortable with that question. That's a bit too personal. They're not given, they're not told they can say no.
And I think that, I certainly know that that's one of my problems, is that we're often people pleasers. Yeah. We are always trying to do what's right. And sometimes you forget what's right for you. So it's it's a little bit of self-compassion in a really in a different way, is holding back. And it's a real fine balance, isn't it? Because being authentic is really valuable, because the more you know about how I work or who I am, the more likely you are to work with me. But there are some things that, that are not appropriate to share. And it's quite a challenge to get that balance right, because some of it is about your who you are as a business person, and some of it is about holding back a little bit from keeping your private life private. And especially in the social media time, it's so hard.
It's so easy. I mean, a good example of this is don't Google me, because I've spent the last 4 years building up an online presence. So I know that somebody Googled me recently and I went, well, how many pages did you get to before you got bored? Now, if you Google me, you will never find a picture of my daughter. You will never find a picture or a story about my practice husband. I love that phrase. You don't actually find his name anywhere, because it's not necessary.
And it's also important to remember that you can, if there's anything on social media, you can actually have it removed. But I know certainly from my perspective, you won't find anything about me until I started my business, because the roles I was in before, my personal life was kept very separate to my business life. Now it's slightly, now it's a very different thing because of the way you're advertising your business, because I'm an open public business now. So yeah, if you can find something, it'd be very interesting. Not because I've done anything interesting. It's just because that wasn't the thing. And also I suppose we weren't quite so prolific on social media.
Yeah, and that has changed the way, if you look at it, it's like, where does the line stop? And I think one of the questions I always ask people before we go live, and we didn't do it because you and I know each other and we know our boundaries because we're friends, but one of the questions I always ask my guests on a Friday morning is, what are your boundaries? And the reason I ask this, and I want to explain just a quick technique that I always say to people when you're in a live situation or you're public speaking, you're on stage and you feel that emotion, because when you are recanting a story. We talked about this last time about pictures
Yeah.
and how it can bring up and links to emotion. But sometimes your emotions can get the better of you. And that's where boundaries really, really come into play. Because if you can acknowledge the emotion that is coming up, if you can acknowledge that you are pushing towards one of your boundaries, and you can identify that this is an area that you're uncomfortable with, or an area you're happy to share, then you can acknowledge and you can identify, and then you can make that choice, the choice to talk or the choice to change the subject, because you are in control, because you have clearly defined your boundaries of what you will and will not share. So one thing I'd say to anybody who's about to become a speaker, go and do a live interview, make sure you have clearly defined your boundaries of what you will not share, and what is not going to trip you up, and go off. And if you don't know what acknowledge, identify, and move on is, think of it as a traffic light system. So red light, green, red light, green. Oh, just quite dyslexic. Red, amber, green. And it's as simple as that. Stop, think, breathe. I'm okay. I'm not okay. Let's move on. It's as simple as that. Anyway,
I think in those situations, it's really important to recognize that actually taking a breath and leaving space is okay. You think you're slowing down, but the audience don't recognize it. And actually having some practice phrases or some phrases in your bank that you use all the time. So if you can't say no, because you find it quite difficult to say no, then say, I don't think so. Or I need to get back to you on that. Or I had somebody I've worked with and known talks about the porcupine. So throwing the question back, you say, oh, that's a very interesting question. How would you answer that? Mm-hmm. Or what are you looking for that? Because sometimes somebody will ask you a question, their intention is completely different, but it's a trigger for you. So actually taking a breath and saying, oh, that's a very interesting question. What kind of information are you looking for? Or, how would you answer that? I think that's a really interesting one.
It really is.
Yeah,
We've had a comment. Of course, I have to put my glass on, from Miles. Miles Gom has said, we'll catch up again soon. Always great to listen to you. Always great advice. Thank you, Miles. Yeah. We'll see you very, very shortly. It is. And I think there's a lot of people out there that go, oh, do this. And this is something about socials. Again, back to the socials, back to your website, back to everything that you put out there. You have to really, really be clear. But it also has to, I'm going to go back to your goals. It has to align to your goals. It has to be driving where you want it to go.
Yeah, it's recognizing your goals, but it needs to be congruent with your values as well. So if your values are about authenticity, then stick to that. If you there are things that you don't want to say, stick to that, and bring the conversation back to what you want to talk about. I think that's really critical. Is you can just say, oh yes, interesting. You don't have to answer everything.
You don't.
I'm going to have to practice this now, actually, because I'm very aware that I'm going, oh yes, like a happy puppy. Yeah, I'll answer that. And it's like, well, sometimes it's best to say nothing.
Well, this thing back to that being still that we were talking about, yeah. There is a moment that in the stillness that, they all joke about it. When you're stressed, you go off and you find somewhere calm, somewhere peaceful. In that stillness is where you can find creativity. In that stillness is where you can find your confidence. In that stillness, you can take that breath. And in that stillness, you can define your boundaries. I'm so sad, aren't I?
Well, it's not. Sometimes all it is sometimes you just need to decompress. You just need to take a step away. Where again, it's that whole, if your body is coursed with cortisol, how are you going to get it off? And it's finding a way to shake it off. Some of that is literally shake it off, do something physical to get rid of it. And then just, that's why there are so many people that talk about grounding. There's a whole concept around how important grounding is. We are electrical beings. We are coursed with waves. We have our own electrical wave process. We're bombarded by all sorts of technology as well. And actually what we need to do is ground us a little bit, just like you ground the water connection in your home is grounded. We need it too. So actually going for a walk in nature really has its value. I mean, I might get all woo-woo here, but there's some science around it. There's some real science about it. And it's actually, there's everybody, I would just imagine almost everybody feels a lot calmer around water. It's just watching the waves or watching the river. And hell, we've got quite a lot of water. There's a river down your road, even if even though there wasn't before. So, you know, watching that and just being in the moment. And that is kind of, yeah, that's our nod to Mental Health Week as well. This is be in the moment, you know, just take some time out to decompress and learn how to do nothing.
Oh, do you know, I had a couple of days of that last week where I needed to stop. And usually, and as we're wrapping up here, but usually I would have in the past, I would have given myself a really hard time over this. But actually, I decided to give myself permission. Again, it's that boundary. Rather than self-hating and attacking my personal self, because I needed some time to reevaluate where I was going. So I took the be still moment and I gave myself permission, and I didn't put a boundary on the time it was going to take. I knew I needed some time, but there was a boundary in the permission that I gave myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really sometimes there should be on your to-do list, do nothing. Yeah, because we're so kind of caught up in the moment to get stuff done, and I need this and I need this, and it's like, actually, do you really? Yeah. What happens if you don't? Yeah. Is it the end of the world? What happens if you don't? And then and also ask for help. Yeah. So if you get to that, yeah, and it is a hard one when you're in that go mode, is actually to stop and go, who can help me? Because the same thing on the reverse is quite often you'd be quite happy to help somebody. You know, if you're on the way to the shops anyway, or if you're doing something anyway, then you can actually pick something up for somebody else, or you can answer an email quickly for somebody if they're not available. You can make a phone call for somebody, or you ask somebody, can you ring those people for me? Can you do that? And so that you take away some of that and you give yourself some space.
Brilliant. Thank you again. Great conversation.
Oh, yeah, great conversation.
Looking forward to next month. Join us again for Cultivating Confidence, the first Tuesday of the month at 12 o'clock. November, I don't know what date that is. Oh, no, November the 5th, I think it is. Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Jo.
Is it the first? It's the second Tuesday. I don't know if you've noticed.
Do you know what? I need to learn some boundaries.
Yeah, and if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, you've got a kind of burning question. It could be something you think is quite innocuous, but we're quite good at expanding the conversation.
Well, let's be honest. This one came out, somebody asked me a question about boundaries and how to define them. And now we're debating it live on air. So yes, do send us a message and we will debate it, because, hey, Jill and I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, and if you want some help setting some boundaries.
Get it done.
Mine is always, my boundaries are, well, yeah, always available with coffee and cake. Yeah.
Love it.